Welcome to Solutions for Mental Wellness. We are going to continue our talk that we started the other day with Terrence Dawkins, and we're going to continue focusing on transgenerational trauma and how we can become pattern breakers. And in being a pattern breaker, we are starting something new and different. And when we ended our last session, I could not help but think about Joshua in the Bible. Joshua was the right-hand man for Moses, and Moses and the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because they did not follow what God had told them to do about going into the land of milk and honey, and they were fearful, and so they lost direction and they wandered in the wilderness. After Moses had died, Joshua made a bold statement. He said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And he started something new and different. And if it was going to be just him and his family, he was willing to do it. But he was going to go in a new direction, one that he knew he needed to go in. And that had to be so hard for him. And his story is there in Scripture. It has to be hard for anyone who wants to do this work to look at the patterns that their family has had over the past 40 years and say, I want to do something different. What is step one in someone wanting to become a cycle or a pattern breaker?
Yeah, step one is creating awareness about it, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't fix it or you can't break the pattern. And that awareness piece helps you understand or helps you see and visualize, I don't like what's happening to me right now. Just with the story that you shared, they did not, Joshua didn't like what was happening. He didn't see any benefit of what was going on. He saw all the negative things and how it was negatively impacting the family. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make a change. And maybe this change will then change my how things are moving forward for me and my family. And that's kind of like the same mindset people need to take when they start recognizing the negative patterns, whether that's how they get easily irritated or how they show up in relationships. As far as, and when I say show up in relationships, I'll talk a little bit about that. Meaning, if I'm overly anxious because someone does something or does not do anything, then that could mean I'm having a what we call it a wound, an attachment wound.
Okay.
Right? And that could be I get anxious when I don't feel like I'm important to people, or I feel anxious when I feel like I'm not doing enough, or what I do does not matter. And so that's what I mean by how people show up in relationships. Like, what is really causing you to react to certain situations or not react to certain situations? And that's when you realize these patterns are not benefiting me or my family anymore. I need to do something different. And I think that's what Joshua did. He saw the benefits of going a different direction.
Yeah. And so once we decide to go in a different direction, what are some healthy things that we can communicate to our families? Because I can imagine if we are changing how we relate to them, they may feel rejected, abandoned. And if that is what their experience was as children, then we become instruments of pain.
Yeah. And I'm not even going to lie to you. It probably will take some time when you're trying to teach and show family how to make changes. But the first thing you can do is try to tell them what you're noticing. So with my mom personally, like I said, growing up, she was sometimes emotionally unavailable. Over time, as I learned more about myself and the patterns that I want to break, I slowly started showing her, not necessarily telling her, but showing her how exactly these changes could be made and what she needed to do. And that would be, I need you to communicate how you feel. I didn't tell her, Mom, I need you to tell me how you feel. It was more, I started showing her how I felt, and then she started reciprocating that because she started receiving it. And a lot of this transgenerational trauma or intergenerational trauma comes from the secrets that are kept within families.
Speak more to that, because that is really important in the work that I've done over these several years of being a therapist, I have noticed that there are so many family secrets, and it takes about working 6 months with a client or a family before I really learn what's going on because there's a family secret. And so tell us more about family secrets.
So, just to give an example, if there was a situation with infidelity within the family, let's say grandfather has some infidelity, and so grandmother has created a view on men or a view on relationships. Due to that family secret, now grandma's going to show up differently in new relationships, and she's going to teach children about how she views them, about how maybe you can't trust relationships, or relationships are not good, or you have to always please your partner in order for them to stay. And so now that child's going to pick up on those things that grandma teaches them because of the secret of your grandfather stepped out, or your grandfather was not really committed or anything like that. So what she experienced and probably doesn't want to talk about because of shame, she then kind of buries that, but it's not truly buried because what grandma now views is
It's
passed
coming out.
on, is coming out.
Yes.
And once you unlock, maybe grandma reacted this way because of this secret, I can now understand why grandma thought this way and why she taught me this, and now I see why I'm doing this.
Yes, I call that doormat syndrome. When I see that someone is becomes a doormat, lays down and lets other people wipe their feet on them just to stay in relationship, that causes that person harm, and they're doing it because they want relationship, but they really don't have relationship. They have a transaction
Yes.
that says, I will be in relationship with you if you lay down and let me wipe my feet on you.
Yep.
So do we have to, when we're trying to unpack our transgenerational trauma or our interpersonal trauma, do we need to help someone identify what they're doing to maintain the unhealthy relationship?
Yes, absolutely, because that is, again, a part of that awareness piece, and that's where it starts. Let me show you what you're doing. Let me show you how what your behaviors are doing to continue what I've connected the dots on. And once they figure that out, then that light bulb comes on, like, hey, maybe I am continue to carry on this cycle. And then once you go back, it's like, oh, I'm continuing to carry on the cycle because I was taught from my mom or taught from my grandmother or whatever caretaker you had growing up.
So Kristen Neff has written a lot on self-compassion. And when we are thinking about doing our own work, it's really important that we start with self-compassion. So like you said in another talk that we had, it's important that we do own our own, how we are contributing, our personal responsibility, I think is what you said. But we still need to be kind to ourselves,
Yes.
not excuse ourselves, but to be kind to ourselves, to say, oh, I am now aware that when I did this, I was keeping up this that really kept me from having what I wanted, what I needed. So speak more to that.
I like the way you just put that. When I did this, it kept me from what I actually wanted. So a part of intergenerational trauma and part of transgenerational trauma, what I teach is attachment. I talk a lot about attachment. So attachment theory is how we bond and create and maintain relationships based off of how our earlier relationships were. And these attachments styles could be secure, avoidant, anxious, or disorganized. So those are some of the different attachment styles. If I have an anxious attachment style, I truly want to be connected and I truly want to be loved, but I start to become very hyper aware of small things. So if someone was to text me every morning and tell me good morning, the first day that they do not, my alarm system goes off and says something's wrong, you need to fix it, and you need to explore it. So now it could lead to an interrogation of that person of, why did you change your behavior? What did I do? As we start to, in a way, bug them, and that could be overwhelming for someone. And then guess what's going to happen? We want them to talk to us, but since we're overwhelming them with all these questions because we're anxious,
pushing them away.
we're pushing them away.
Yeah.
So it keeps me, I really want it, but it keeps me from getting what I want.
Because I'm so afraid I'm going to lose it.
Exactly. And that comes from early on. I've learned that if our behavior changes, I've learned that I need to be anxious. I need to be aware of what's going on. And that could be, I went to mom, like when my nephew or niece went to my sister. I went to mom and asked her a question, but she responded with anger and frustration. But tomorrow I'll go talk to mom, and she responds all loving and caring and nurturing. That confuses them because now they don't know what they're going to get.
Yes.
So now I become anxious of, do I go talk to her or do I not? Or I now internalize it as a child, because that's how I make sense of a lot of things as children. We internalize it. So I made mom upset, or I made mom happy, but I don't know if this is going to make her happy or upset. And that's how we get confused. Children get confused when they're younger, because they can't really rationalize a lot of things yet, and so they internalize it.
So how do adolescents internalize the messages or the direct communication from their parents that says, in order to be loved, you have to blank?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the blueprint has already been laid, especially once they get to adolescence. So a lot of the values, a lot of the views on the world is already there. So now they're operating from a system that, in a way, needs to be corrected. And again, this doesn't happen overnight, and there's not an easy fix to it. But my belief is, if we make the adolescent aware of maybe where some of these things are coming from, or if we make the parents aware where some of these beliefs and behaviors are coming from, one or both can then work together to try to make those changes.
Yes.
And those changes could look like the adolescent realizing that I'm not the problem. I'm not always the problem.
But they might feel like they are. But that's not fact.
That's not fact. And we're starting to challenge and reframing some of these different beliefs that they've created because of some of their early childhood experiences. And I even do the same work with adults that I do with adolescents, because it's about learning not only behaviors and patterns, but also where they started from. So really having them understand what happened to you, not necessarily think about why am I the problem, why I always do this, but what happened to you to make you feel that way?
Yeah. Wow, that's good stuff. So you work a lot with young adults at Furman. Is the approach with a young adult different than an adolescent?
The language might be different, but the approach is the same. With the college students that I work with, a lot of them come in, but with a lot of social anxiety around building and maintaining connections with people, which then contributes to the depression that they have. Because as humans, we thrive off connection with others. Even though we don't have it, and we're like, oh, I don't need anybody.
So we're made for relationship.
Exactly.
We heal in relationship.
Exactly.
And when we isolate, which is what depression and anxiety often does, then we take ourselves out of the best place of healing.
Exactly. And that's why they come, because they don't know how to develop and maintain those relationships. Or they'll say things like, oh, I'm just weird. Or
I'm guilty of
yeah,
saying
I'm weird. What else do I get? I just can't do this. Or so they start put all of these barriers and limitations on themselves. Now we need to figure out, where did these barriers and limitations come from? Because you weren't born thinking you're weird. You weren't born thinking I just can't build these relationships. It came from either childhood experiences with caregivers, parents, or through social interactions with other people that made you start to believe that. So now we got to start working on what happened to you, not necessarily what you're believing right now.
So, what happened to you? You're thinking about the experience in the context of life. Give us some examples of how using transgenerational trauma can bring healing.
Yeah. And I even, like I said, I'll use my personal example. I have or had and currently working on an issue with, if, how can I put it? If in a friendship or a relationship, I expect people to do the same thing I'm doing for them. So if I'm, calling, texting, showing you my interest, and I feel like,
You're expecting
especially
reciprocity.
reciprocity, right? But it always doesn't happen that way. And if I don't get that specific reciprocity, then I feel like something's wrong. But I don't understand that that person also have their own history and they show love differently or they verbalize love differently. But if it's not in the way that I need it, then again, here comes that anxious attachment style coming up. And then I start to maybe ask questions or I start to pull away because now I don't want to get hurt. And that impacts the quality of that particular relationship. So the impact or the benefits of healing is now I can recognize, I'm aware of it, so I can recognize it. And so when it happens, I can start making different actions to change it.
Terrence, when you're in relationship with someone, or maybe your sister says you're just like blank, and the blank could be your mom, your dad, your uncle. What is that like for you?
To be honest with you, I get that actually. People tell me I'm just like my mom all the time. And it can go a couple ways, I think. It depends on how do you view your parents. So I view my mom as, loving, caring, hardworking, and very supportive and will do anything for anybody. So if somebody says, hey, you're acting just like your mom or you're just like your mom, in a positive context, I'm like, yeah, I am like her because those are positive things. But if it's more of like a negative context, like you're acting just like your mom or you're going to be just like your mom, and because let's say mom or dad it wasn't there or they had some type of negative qualities, then I'm then going to look at myself in a different way, right? And that even goes to how the teachings we teach children, such as stop acting like a girl or be a man, stop crying before I give you something to cry about.
Oh, yes, that is something I have heard a lot of.
Exactly. The intention is stop crying before I give you something to cry about. You need to, I don't want you to cry anymore. Or you need to act like a man. What you're doing does not serve the qualities of a man, but my intention is to teach you the qualities of what I view as a man. That's the intention. But the interpretation is I can't show my feelings. I can't cry. What I'm doing is not manly or feminine. Another one that I hear a lot is, and this goes back to the family secrets. What goes on in this house stays in this house, right? So what goes on in this house stays in this house. The intention is we need to keep things inside so that bad things don't happen, right? We don't want people to know that we're living in poverty. We don't want people to know maybe there's a history of sexual abuse going on, because if they do, you might get taken from me. Now going back to the slavery thing, if they know that you're having some type of what they would call weakness, emotional weakness, your value is decreased, you can be sold as separated from your family during slavery times. So now what do we do as a culture? We need to keep this a secret because it keeps us together.
It's tied to our worth and it's tied to our community.
Exactly. So these different things that has, like I said, a different intention versus the interpretation, such as you're acting like your mom, you're being like your dad, or stop crying before I give you something to cry about. What goes on in this house stays in this house. We have to really start to think about, instead of just saying it, what is the impact it's having on the other person?
Yes. So understanding transgenerational trauma and the person who makes those statements, because they didn't originate or create those statements. They heard them.
Yep.
And so what is the person who's saying those statements really meaning?
What are they meaning? Well, they're trying to teach That's what anything that our parents are doing, they're trying to teach us, but they can only teach us from the operating system that they were given or that they were taught. So that's how this cycle continues to go on. So they're trying to teach us survival skills. They're trying to teach us how to show up and build and maintain these relationships. They're trying to teach us how to love and care. But the way they go about doing it sometimes can be potentially harmful to the child and give them, like I said, another operating system, because our brains are always trying to make sense of what's going on, no matter what's happening. And if I can't make sense of why they're saying these things, again, I internalize it and everything is turned against me. I'm the problem. I need to stop doing this. Or they told me one thing and I'm reacting to this, so it's my fault, right? But it's not your fault, because again, what they're saying to you didn't start with you, it didn't start with them, and it probably didn't even start with your grandparents. It sometimes can go 3 generations removed.
Let's talk a little bit about development across the lifespan. And that's just a fancy way to say how we develop as we age.
Yep.
And children, from what I've heard you say today, the world revolves around them. Yep. And so if someone is saying something negative to them, then they take that internally. Mm-hmm. For adolescents or teens, they are acting out based on the messages that they received.
Yep.
And for young adults, they are trying to figure out how what they've learned fits in with the larger context.
Yep.
So when we consider developing or maturing through life, how can we understand ourselves and maybe our identity? Because I want to talk more about that in another program, but can you transition us to help us see how understanding where we are in life, where we've been, can actually change the trajectory of our future, just like it did with Joshua?
Yeah. So, like you said, the lifespan of infancy, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, older adulthood, what's starting to happen with our brains is our emotional brain develops first. So how we interpret things and react to things is based off of how we feel. It's based off of emotions. And then as we get older, adolescence, young adult, and then full adulthood, what's starting to develop is our cortex. So that's going to help us
And that's the center of
rationalize.
the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That helps us rationalize what we feel. So as we get older, not only are we transitioning from how we feel about things and reacting emotionally, we're now bringing in the making sense part of it. Mm-hmm. So depending on where you are in your life development or lifespan, you're starting to try to make sense of it. And what starts to happen is I've had all this potential trauma when I was reacting emotionally. Now when I start to make sense of it, the only way I can make sense of it is to think about how I felt at that moment and what was going on when I felt that way. I did something for something that happened. So now, again, I internalize it. So it really depends on, like you said, you brought up a key point, where we are developmentally, and understanding that now I'm trying to make sense of it and challenging what you're making sense of when it is not benefiting you.
It's never too late to start doing our own work.
Now we're doing some memory recall. And so a lot of times when we do memory recall, it's probably not exactly how it happened because our brain had to make sense of it. But it still gives you a nice context of, during this moment, I felt betrayed because they started talking to someone else and they cheated on me. And now I just have this generalization that everybody's going to do that. And that's how it impacts how you show up now.
You train your clients to identify the language they're speaking to themselves, and then you're helping them interpret that based on what was told to them.
Exactly.
The message they received growing up.